Welcome to another IntoTheBlock webinar on which we try to cover a lot of the most important topics in the Web3 crypto market. Today, I'm particularly excited because we're going to talk about Web3 AI. This is sort of a version of my session at Consensus a few weeks ago. But fundamentally, we're going to talk about myths and realities in Web3 AI, what works and what doesn't work. And we have a lot of ground to cover. The agenda is super simple, so we're going to take a quick, honest look at the Web3 AI market, what doesn't work, what could work if the market develops, what is really real. And I want to close it out with a very ambitious idea that I recently published in CoinDesk. A couple of logistic aspects, so I'll try to cover all this in 30 minutes. If you have any questions, use a Q&A panel. I'll stop several times during the presentation or at the end to take questions. So, but let's get started because we have a lot of ground to cover. Before we go fully into the topic, we always do a quick update about ITV. So I'll go relatively fast. On our analytics product, we recently launched a new perspective of the below BlackRock fund, so you can find some of the most interesting metrics about the work that Securitize has been doing with BlackRock and the traction. So check it out. It's very, very insightful. On our institutional, on our DeFi Risk Radar platform, we recently launched the risk signals for EtherFi. That is a top LRT in the market. So you can, there is dozens and dozens of risk signals there. This product is growing super fast. And then on our institutional DeFi platform, last week, we launched a new bot in partnership with EtherFi for the Symbiotic protocol, and it's going pretty fast. Already has 75 million in it, and it's only been a few days. And we're working on new ideas there. On that, on some other updates related, next week we're gonna be unveiling a number of new DeFi strategies for Avalanche. Cannot talk too much about this just yet, but will be public next week, and you should expect new releases in the Risk Radar platform for LRT, Swell, Renzo, and protocols like Reserve that has been completed development. So we're just putting the release schedule. So if you go to a Risk Radar Pro, there is already quite a bit of coverage for DeFi protocol, and there will be more next week. That's all related to IntoTheBlock. So let's go into the topic, and let's start with taking a very honest look at the Web3 AI space. When you think about Web3 AI, there is almost like two conflicting views that you're going to hear throughout this presentation. One view is that Gen AI philosophically must be decentralized, right? The market is evolving in a way that the power is concentrated into 4 or 5 companies. These companies are playing all sorts of regulatory games to shut down open source projects and all that. So it's not very pretty. But at the same time, and Web3 is probably the best alternative. On this, one thing that I didn't mention on the intro, obviously you guys know me as CEO of IntoTheBlock. I'm also my background is really in AI, and I'm the co-founder and president of 3 companies in generative AI, one in autonomous agents, one in LLM infrastructure, and one that we're going to announce soon on benchmarking that actually has something related to Web3. So I'm super, and I teach this stuff at Columbia, so I'm super deep into the topic of that intersection, and I've been struggling with a lot of the points that I'm going to mention here. So on one side, we think Gen AI must be decentralized. On the other, Web3 doesn't have any infrastructure to do this, right? Only people that haven't worked in AI before believe that you can actually decentralize this monstrosity of models with the tiny infrastructure that we have in today's blockchain. So a key point here to think about this from a different angle AI is a centralization force. So AI as a technology evolved in increasingly centralized ways. So we're going from somewhat decent-sized computer GPU clusters to probably 10 to 100 gigabits clusters that are increasingly centralized with massive communications between GPUs. The models are getting more concentrated. So decentralizing AI is not a natural fit. It's not what it was designed to do. So you have to, we need to fight an uphill battle. But on the other side, the market is evolving at a point that this is getting concerning, right? So first of all, generative AI doesn't evolve linearly, doesn't evolve exponentially. It's evolving at a multi-exponential pace. So the gap between Web 2 and Web 3 when it comes to AI is increasing is widening, right? Only people in Web 3 believe that we're actually shrinking that gap. No, it's gonna get a point after GPT-6 or whatever that there might not be a point, it might be a point of no return, right? And the control in the market is concentrated in 5-6 companies. There's probably 4 open source companies standing at a scale: Hugging Face, Meta, Mistral, and what Elon Musk is doing with XAI. Everybody else has probably cannot compete at the scale of the big models. And then you have Google and OpenAI playing all these weird games of trying to regulate open source AI. So it's kind of weird, like we're creating these monstrous models that are, outputting black Nazi pictures and all that. So we don't know how to control it, but by the way, Congress go and try to regulate the open source guys. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's what's happening in the space. And then on the other hand, you have this problem that Web3 is not set up to decentralize these large scale models. For 10 years, nobody cared about AI in Web3. We didn't build anything to support now. Now this revolution is happening, and we don't have any infrastructure to be able to be able to do that. And an important point here is that gap between Web 2 and Web 3 is actually getting worse, right? And it might get to a point that we cannot bridge it anymore. Another point here is that decentralized AI is not a new thing. So this has been, I was writing about this about 2018, right? So this has been around for a while, and it has never worked. So the question is why? So probably the one example about decentralized AI that has worked is something Google did called federated learning. That is, a lot of the models that run on your Pixel phone today so work in that thing. They collect information and send the gradients, not your personal information, and then the model gets retrained and pushes the way back to the phone. So it's the only thing that has worked in decentralized AI at a scale. So the reason being is that before foundation models, the infrastructures, the models were simple enough, easy to understand enough, that nobody wanted to be decentralized, right? Like you could understand the models, you could get the trust, transparency, none of that really mattered, right? Like we could understand how the models work. And it's almost like we didn't have an intermediate step. We went from these simpler models with LSTM by LSTM CNNs to these monster models, right? With billions and trillions of parameters that nobody understands. So now it is a problem. There is a strong case for decentralized AI, but the infrastructure is really not there. So continuing on this line of thinking, I would like to express a controversial thesis that I also wrote about at CoinDesk. That is that generative AI, we all love it, but from the Web3 perspective, it might be the worst thing that has happened to the space. So this evolution, this revolution in Gen AI happened at the time that Web3, for the first time, we found some use cases that actually work. We had DeFi, we had some stuff with NFTs, going, gaming, and then we got hit by a bear market, and then this stuff happened in Web 2 at the same time. So there is a massive gap in capabilities on what you can build today in Web 2 AI and Web 3 AI, right? It's not even in the same galaxy. There is a massive research and engineering talent gap. I cannot name 5 top researchers that have knowledge, AI researchers that have knowledge or they're involved in Web 3 in any way. So there is no talent to build like real stuff. There is a VC funding shift, like obviously a lot of the capital has been going to Web2 AI. And why? Well, we never bothered about addressing AI for 10 years, right? And now we got hit with this perfect storm, and we just don't have a single blockchain that can run these things, right? We don't have AI talent. We don't have a funding infrastructure that can scale to those levels. So all these gaps need to be addressed, but it's obviously not very easy. Not very easy. On the flip side, there is a massive amount of opportunities, right? Like more and more of the world is coming to the idea that the agreement that this decentralized AI should be part of the equation, right? But you cannot decentralize everything right now because we're not ready. You need to decentralize what we can and what makes sense. So when you look at the current market in decentralized AI, obviously we have generative AI super overfunded, right? Companies that have raised billions of dollars that haven't been able to compete or to produce anything meaningful, and that excitement translates, permeates into Web3. But then in Web3, we don't have this talent, we don't have people that understand the market, we don't have VCs that have been investing in AI. So as a result, we start funding all sorts of stupid things, right? That don't have any connection to reality in AI. So we have a number of things that don't work and are very unlikely to work. And some things that could work, and there is a lot of opportunity. So things that don't work is anything that requires heavy compute or that goes to the hardcore of building models and things like that. And we're gonna go into why. And things that could work, and there are many aspects of the life cycle of AI applications that could be decentralized, right? The data part, the evaluation part, there's things that could be decentralized and they don't impose that very heavy compute and data infrastructure. But let's go a little bit more granular and let's talk about what doesn't work today in Gen AI, what could work that requires some pushing, and what we are pretty certain that is going to create quite a bit of value. So one thing that again, a key point on that you should take away from this segment of the presentation is that there is a massive gap. It's almost like a reality distortion field. Like we're building projects in Web3 AI that have no use case. Heavily funded, multi-billion-dollar market cap. Nobody's asking for it. They don't have a single real customer that is paying for it. They're probably not going to have one ever unless the market completely shifts. And I think that's a cultural thing, right? That this revolution happened too fast and we haven't had time to adapt. So we're playing all these games with crypto funding, right? So the way, how do you address that? And this could be debated, but I think the way I like to think about the market is a very personal view, is that there are no native Web3 use cases today, but there are plenty of Web2 use cases that could use Web3 infrastructure. And that's probably a sane way to think about it. Like all the use cases, all the customers are in Web2, 99% of it, but they can use some level of Web3 infrastructure. So what doesn't work? Let me give you a few examples. So you have seen plenty of companies that are doing GPU clouds. And this is changing a little bit because I think many of them have realized that this doesn't work. But initially, a few months ago, you will hear this message, GPU clouds for pre-training and fine-tuning models. So only if you never pre-train or fine-tune a model, you actually believe that works. So pre-training and fine-tune foundation models require massive clusters of GPUs that are in close proximity to the other, and the communication bus matter. Like you have to have massive communication between the GPUs. Is the difference between doing a pre-training job that could last two months or so, or 2 years, right? So thinking that you're gonna run this with 2 GPUs in Atlanta and 1 in Toronto is like crack smoking fantasy. It doesn't work. It's not designed for that. So the world is moving to these mega supercomputers that we're talking about 100 gigabits supercomputers, and now we're trying to do this decentralized thing for GPU network. So right now, it seems that there is a technical barrier there that I don't know how that gets solved right now. Another one that is a little bit up there is this idea of zero knowledge machine learning. There is actually very credible research about this. So the idea here is, so all these foundation models that have hidden layers, and in those layers you can embed zero knowledge computation to prove what the things are doing. So, and there are things like SQL or CKML that are doing that, right? And they work in very small models. The problem is that when you put a model with billions of weights, right, of parameters, and you insert zero knowledge computation into that, it's so computational expensive that it's completely impractical. And then I think it's also backwards from the reasoning standpoint, because interpretability is probably the biggest problem in Gen AI right now. These models are so big that nobody understands how they work. They cannot correlate an output to the architecture of the network. Interpretability still requires a couple of research breakthroughs. Anthropic and OpenAI they're doing some very interesting work in this space that has been published in the last 2-3 weeks. So if we're fighting to try to understand how this thing works, what are we doing putting zero knowledge computations in the middle? It's almost like counterproductive to the way the industry is thinking. And that's a level of delusion that I think you deal with in Web3 AI right now that we need to start fighting, but it's also not practical. Then proof of inference. So this idea is also the same about, we need to prove that the model did what it's supposed to do. And there are several projects in that space. It actually works. It's simple to do, except nobody's asking for it. Like, there is not a single company I know that actually cares about this stuff, right? Like, when GPT-4o tells you this is the output, it's the output. Like, I don't need another level of validation for this stuff. That one actually does work, which is more than what we can say from the other two. Now, what could work, but it's going to require some pushing, but I think there is a lot of potential here. Decentralized inference actually works. So as I told you, pre-training and fine-tuning doesn't. Inference, this idea of I can run the same inference across many nodes and aggregate the result is interesting. And I think there's some use cases in mission critical industries that could be interesting. But it's not a prominent use case. It's not, you have the market claiming for this, but this is one that in IoT devices, things like that, is there could be quite a bit of IP unlock there. The idea of creating fine-tuning and pre-training data sets. So there are different schools of thoughts in AI. There is an entire segment of the market that believes that we're running out of data, and others that don't, because we keep producing data as human species every day. But there is an entire idea of creating synthetic data sets that are high quality for pre-training and fine-tuning models. And I think crypto networks, decentralized networks, could play a role on that. And it's quite interesting. When I take the opposite side of that equation, is there's never been in history a large data marketplace company. Typically, they haven't been conducive to building big businesses. And there is a ton of security and privacy challenges that go with that, to get a pharmaceutical company to put a data set in a network. But there is something there, like it could potentially work. So now there's some trends that I'm a little bit more bullish that they will actually work. One of them is a small foundation model. So last year, Microsoft published a very famous paper called Textbooks is All You Need, in which they outline a model called PHI, that was trained in computer science and math textbooks, and it was able to outperform. It was only less than 1 billion parameters, and it was able to outperform everybody on those things. And their point is, you can have super high quality, smaller models. And from that, Phi has evolved. It's now in the third iteration. And Microsoft coined the term small language models, SLMs. And you can, I call it small foundation models because it's not language, could be image, could be other things, audio. But I think video is impossible at this point for smaller models, but maybe we'll get there. But this idea, everybody thinks that Web3 has to get bigger to host foundation model. Maybe the models can get smaller, And if the models get small enough to run on your iPhone, and this is what my company Neurofabric does, we build this type of smaller models, that is a key foundation block to decentralized AI. Because you can certainly decentralize a 500 million to a 2-3 billion parameter model, but you cannot decentralize a 500 billion parameter model. So that idea, I think there's going to be a ton of value created here. I'm a big fan of agentic workflows. What's happened with the agent market right now is super fragmented, and nobody has gotten meaningful traction. And this goes to big companies and Microsoft and all that as well. But this idea, crypto, so agents, the whole idea with agents is that they can make decisions and take action autonomously, and they can collaborate and all that. Thinking that the mechanisms by that are going to be enabled by fiat is a little bit, it's a big friction point. So I think crypto is actually the native currency for agents. The how is a little is more complicated. How to enable, but you can think mechanism in which agents are other agents, in which agents compete for a task. Like all those mechanisms are better suited for programmable money than for fiat currency. So that one, I think it works. There is a lot of work on proof of human things. There are fake news, fake content. This is a massive problem to weaponize Gen AI, and there is research on the other side to detect fake content and things like that. There is a great company in Web2 called GPT-0 that works in this space, and I think the decentralized version of that is interesting. Like, can you run all these models that validate things? There is that's a thing that for decentralized networks actually work well. And then crypto incentive for different AI. It's sort of the generalizations of the previous point. There are things like data set creation, evaluation, human evaluation, for which incentive models are very well suited, right? And we should be able to decentralize more of that. And then to conclude, I want to leave you. This was a topic of my latest article in CoinDesk. I want to leave you with a very ambitious idea that I hope somebody actually executes in this market. So one of the biggest problems in generative AI that nobody talks about it, if you're not in AI, so sort of if you're in Web3, you don't hear a lot of this, is that open source Gen AI is going through a massive funding crunch. You can pick your favorite AI lab in university. It could be Stanford, it could be Berkeley, it could be, if you move out of the Ivy League, it's even worse. Those labs, they're not working on big models anymore. Because they don't have the compute, they don't have the data, it's too expensive. They depend on grants from Meta and Google and things like that. On the other side, you have crypto that is extremely good at funding stuff, like actually a lot of stupid stuff too. So we're good at funding everything. So the intersection of those two is quite interesting. There are 4 companies in open source AI standing at a scale: XAI, Mistral, Meta, and Hugging Face. Even companies that have been super well financed with a lot of talent have not been able to compete. So crypto is extremely good at capital formation, at incentive, and things like that. And the mega opportunity in this space is building a Web3 network that goes toe-to-toe with the big model AI labs. So somebody told me when they were hearing about this idea, he used a phrase like crypto, Web3 is picking the breadcrumbs of Web2 AI. We try to do with Web2, the poor man's version of Web2 AI. We try to emulate what Web2 AI is doing, but we do it worse, and we do it cheaper, and we do it in poorer quality. So what if we can use crypto finance to attract the top research talent and work on models, to give them compute access, to pioneer new foundation models, to pioneer the synthetic data set creation, to create entire pre-training pipelines, and to get the entire industry behind that? Obviously, that's a multi-billion-dollar effort, right? Like that's not it's not accessible to most people, but that's a kind of dream that this industry should get behind it. Because if not, it might get to a point in which we cannot compete anymore. It's done, it's over, right? After GPT 6.7, it might not be a question. anymore. But you cannot do that if you have mediocre talent, decentralized GPU clusters. You need to have world-class talent, infrastructure, ambitions, line of visibility into how the research is evolving. And for that, having capital and the right incentive is key. So I think this is probably one of the biggest opportunities in that space. So, and this is not the summary for this webinar, but okay. So for the next webinar, I'm gonna go to Q&A. We're gonna be talking about the risk-taking space. Somebody from our research team is we have done a ton of work on that. So we should, and if you go to the chat, there is a link, so please go register. So I'll do my own summary of this. There is a ton of opportunity on Web3 AI. But I think the attention of the industry has been misdirected to projects that probably have really no future in capturing value from AI in real AI use case. We need to start focusing on the opportunities that are real, and those today are decentralizing peripheral aspects of the life cycle of AI models, data set creation, feedback, evaluation, things like that, and start little by little, decentralizing those aspects and gaining traction in order to take on more ambitious work. There are things that are in the market that I don't think have a future and ever going to work, including several projects that are valued at multi-billion-dollar market caps. There are things that I think could work, like decentralized inference and things like that with a little bit of push. And there is a ton of opportunities in areas like agentic workflows, in crypto incentive, in a small foundation models. That's all I have. So with that, if you wanna, we can go to Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A panel, and I will try to answer it. Cool. Well, I don't see any questions. That will be. Oh yeah. Sorry. So somebody asked, how do you address the issue on Web3 AI? It's what we said, right? Like try to start decentralizing smaller things and scaling from there. Vanessa had one of her sarcastic comments about nobody cares about some of these use cases. That's cool and true. And I don't see any. Okay, one question here. What is the biggest technical challenge that you see in the space? I think the infrastructure is nowhere near anywhere that we can tackle anything serious right now in Web3 AI. So questions going once, questions going twice. All right, well, thank you very much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the session. I hope to see you in the next one.